Angus Young, how you doing?
Good, Becko.
The Offspring.
How's it going, Becko?
Dave Grohl, how you going, mate?
Good, man.
Pete, it's been a long time coming.
Oh, Becko, hasn't it indeed?
We go inside the dressing room, speak to the biggest names in music,
Keith Richards and the Rolling Stones.
and crack open their esky.
That's exactly how I imagine you, by the way, sitting opposite me with a vodka and orange.
You're a discerning chap. This is The Rider.
Hey, it's Becko. Welcome back to The Rider. And we had a great episode last week with Mark Gable from the Choirboys. And in fact, if you missed it, you got to go back and check out the story about when he met Rose Tattoo's Angry Anderson for the very first time. That is now available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, wherever you get your podcasts. Click follow and subscribe because it'll be waiting for you every time we publish a new episode. And this week, an absolute icon of the Australian music industry. She just clocked up 45 years. Supporting so many incredible Australian acts at Albert's Music. Of course, AC/DC, Rose Tattoo, The Angels, Billy Thorpe, The Choirboys, John Paul Young, The Easy Beats, Harry Vander and George Young, of course, in that, and Stevie Wright, and you could even throw in Ted Mulry Gang. I mean, there's so much history in the hallways of Albert's Music. Can't wait to pick her brain and get so many stories, not just about AC/DC, but how they picked talent, how they found who was going to have that ingredient to come up with great music and, of course, have that incredible work ethic. I could see her Zoom screen about to light up, and it really is an honour to talk to Fifa Riccobono from Albert's Music. Fifa, how are you?
I'm really well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me on the show.
Well, it's funny, I was talking to a newspaper about a month ago now, and they were asking me, who do you want to speak to? And I could have chosen any, rock star or publicist or promoter, and I said, I want to talk to Fifa Riccobono because I just want to pick her brain about all the years at Albert's Music and also all the years just serving the music industry. Is it 45 years?
It would be that. Continuous, it would be 40, and then on the sidelines the last 5 years, yeah. I still consider myself to be part of the industry. I mean, it was my lifeblood. It was everything I've done since I was 16. So I don't feel that I've ever retired. I still do work in a consulting capacity with various people, and I pick various projects that I do. But no, I still feel very much part of the industry.
And so you should. I mean, I've got to ask, so 16 years old, you started at Albert's. What did your parents say? I mean, first of all, they must have had something to say about that.
Well, both my parents wanted me to work. We owned a shop at the time, and both of them said, you don't have to go and work. You can stay here and work in the shop. And that was never going to fly with me at all. So that's why I went out and got a job. But they very graciously sent me to business college, and my intention was when I left business college that I was going to become a court reporter because I'd done shorthand typing and I thought that that'd be really interesting. But I read this ad and I went in for an interview and I got the job at Albert's. So my father was a music lover of the absolute highest regard for music like nobody on this planet. And he also taught me and my brother, the value of music. So being in a music company, was very much something that he thought was great. We hadn't really when I went in and started working at Albert's, I was only working for the professional manager. So I was just secretary to the man who was doing all the sheet music, who was transcribing music. So it wasn't the active recorded side that I was in at that stage. And it wasn't until 72 when I came back from, I'd been at Albert's for 4 years. I had a break. I went to Italy, had 6 months overseas, and when I came back, I started on the labels, on the Albert Productions label side. I lost my father that year, but my mum used to always say, why are you out every night? You're out every night. And I'd say, Mum, it's work. I've got to go and see the bands, because I used to go and see all of our artists, and we had quite a few. So I loved going out and seeing the bands, and she sort of got used to it. And I found that by introducing her to quite a lot of them, over a period of time, she just realised it was just a job. It was just different because it was in the music industry, but the people were all the same. The artists, they weren't stars; they were regular people. And she got used to the idea of me working in the music industry, and it took up all my time. I really loved doing what I did, and I lived it. I lived and breathed it 24/7.
Describe what it was like walking into Albert's for the first time, because this was a powerhouse and had been going for a long time before you got there.
Well, when I walked into it, I felt like I was, walking into a time warp. I was walking into the past. It was a very staid, established publishing house, wonderful copyrights, incredible value in their recordings, but they had not really hit coming to the 20th century. And it was really interesting that I should, go and work for someone who really gave me a taste of all the beautiful old American standards. So I knew what the value of the company was, because the copyrights that they had were just stunning. And then within about a year and a half that I'd been there, they brought in a new CEO, and he really just turned the place around. And he updated it, and then we started really. And Ted Albert got more involved on the publishing and recording side, and starting his own label, and like the Albert Productions label, and getting all the songwriting, publishing together, and that. And it just took a whole new step up, and we then became very competitive with the local contemporary market.
So Ted Albert, what made him so special as a manager? Because that's all I've heard. He was a great manager, a great leader, and respected everyone.
It's funny because he was a very quiet, unassuming person, had a great presence. If he walked into a room, you would certainly notice him. He was quite a tall chap. Very gentle, very compassionate, had incredible vision and passion. The best thing that I can say about him is he understood music. He played music, tinkered around in the studios and bought all the latest gadgets. He really backed good people. When he was looking at George and Harry, they had been with him for years as the Easy Beats, but even when the Easy Beats disbanded, he kept them on side because he knew they were great songwriters, and he just kept them, kept the relationship going. So he was able to then bring them back to Australia, and when they came back, he set up Albert Productions with them. So he knew who to back, and then he backed the right people in the studio to put studios together. He had great people around him all the time, but he had vision in the sense that he knew what he was looking for, and he could put all the pieces into place. And then once he had you there and you were doing what you were meant to do, he let you do it. He didn't stand over you. He would guide you if you wanted guidance, but he let you get on with it. And I think that was his biggest strength, was believing in the people that he surrounded himself with, and letting them bringing out the best in them just by letting them be themselves. And so that's what he was like with the artists. He was with the producers, with the engineers, the studio people that put the studios together. I mean, he hired some great people, and we had some great equipment. But you can have the best equipment in the world, and it means nothing if the people behind, the desk don't know what they're doing. I used to always say George and Harry could make anything sound amazing on a 2-track, and you could put in a 96 track in front of someone with the latest mod cons. If they don't know what they're doing, it means nothing. They could make anything sound great.
And speaking of equipment, I've sat behind one of the Neve desks at the old Alberts, and I think one of them went to a new home with someone else, and to sit behind such an iconic desk. I remember Sam Horsburgh was talking it up, saying this is the one that so much music was made through, and I'm sitting behind it going, AC/DC and the Angels, and I mean, going back to George and Harry, it was a masterstroke, because when you think of the amount of music that came out of that songwriting duo.
I don't know how many people would have given their IT to be able to work in the environment that I was in, to be able to work with George and Harry, to be able to work with Ted. It was stunning. I mean, George and Harry were writing songs when they were in England, and they were sending them over to Ted, and Ted would go, I've got someone for this. And we had Pasadena for John Paul Young, who recorded in 1971, I think it was, and did really well. He had Falling in Love Again for Ted Mulry, which did really well. Then he wrote, they had songs for Ray Burgess, Alison McCallum. She had a hit with Superman. I mean, you could rattle it, and all right up to JPY. They had like so many songs for JPY. They had the songs and they were looking for the right vehicles for them. And John suited most of the material brilliantly. Then they had a couple of songs that Ted really liked, but they couldn't work. They didn't have the right vocals for it or the right person to do vocals. And that's when they came up with William Shakespeare. And so William Shakespeare came in and did My Little Angel. And it was a hit. And then he did Can't Stop Myself from Loving You. That was a hit. Then they signed Stevie, and Stevie came in and did the Hard Road album, which had, the trilogy, Evie's parts 1, 2 and 3, which was just stunning. And then they signed AC/DC and came up with the first album. Then they came up with Rose Tattoo. Then they came up with The Angels. They came up with Choirboys. Flash in the Pan was another one of their, they had all these songs and couldn't find who they wanted to record them. And Ted said, well, why don't you do them yourselves? And so they went into the studio and became a studio band and put it together. So they had a hit with Hayes and Peter, and that was followed by Down Among the Dead Men, and they did really well. So then the European companies started coming to us and saying, well, we want Flash in the Pan. So Ted said, well, you have to put an album together now, because they'd only just put them out as 2 tracks.
Of course, yeah.
And so then they recorded an album, and we did a deal in Europe with Ariola, I think it was at the time. And they said, well, we want more albums. So then they went in and recorded more albums, but they were writing songs all the time. There was something going on all the time. We had session musicians coming in left, right and centre. We had 4 or 5 different drummers that would come in right from the early AC/DC days right through. And, some of the times George wouldn't be happy and he'd end up redoing all the drum section. He could do everything. He could play drums, he could play bass, guitar, piano, everything. Harry's a brilliant guitarist and really, complemented everything. But we used to have backing singers that think of a song and say, oh, let's get someone in. And it was a constant music factory, I suppose, the way you could call it. But it wasn't just turning out rubbish. It was churning out great songs.
It must have been amazing just to walk in there late at night even, and they'd be in there, I'm sure, until 2 or 3 in the morning, working on things.
All the time. And in the beginning, because it was the first studio we put together, we used to lease it out as well. So George and Harry used to get the midnight to dawn stuff. But it sort of suited them in a way, because when some of the bands I'd get in, like AC/DC and Stevie and that, is that they'd have been out at a gig and they'd like to get them in while they were still hot, still vibed, and come in and they'd record. So they could record all night. They could be there all night. They might record one song. They might record heaps of songs. It was whatever the mood was, whatever the feel was at the time, they took advantage of it. They did as much as they could at the right time, and they wouldn't stop until they were actually convinced that they got the best possible recording from all of the artists, or the best work that they could put forward.
I can imagine AC/DC coming off stage somewhere like, Checkers or the Bondi Lifesaver or somewhere, and coming straight back in and recording Let There Be Rock. And I actually remember hearing a story about this, and this came from, it was the Angels. They were in the studio just hanging out, and they were doing Let There Be Rock, and it came to the end, the absolute, the crescendo, and the amplifier blew up. I don't know if you were in there at the time, but
No, I certainly wasn't. I wasn't there for the midnight sessions. I was there all day during the day. I couldn't do burn the candle at both ends. I used to be in there at first thing in the morning. I'd go and see them in shows. I'd see everybody at shows and go around. And I just love being a part of everything that was going on. But no, most of the times in the studio, I'd go in and get a feel for it, and I'd walk out. But I certainly wasn't involved in any of the recording stuff at all. I was just happy once they gave me something and said, this is our new single, this is the new album, and then I could run off and do what I had to do.
Now tell me about the time you approved Bon Scott at the Rockdale Masonic Hall, and you ultimately had the yay or nay whether he was good enough or had the right whatever it was
Oh,
for
no,
AC/DC.
oh, no, that's just giving me a little bit too much power. No, not at all. I lived in Rockdale, and George and Harry couldn't come out to see them. They knew Bob was coming up, and Bob would be with the band, and they said, "Can you go and see him?" And I said, "Sure, it's on my way home. I'll stop in and see it." But no, it wasn't. I didn't give the approval at all. I just I agreed.
Yeah.
You know, he was right. I certainly did go back and say I felt he was perfect. A little crass, a little cocky, but perfect. But no. I didn't have that power.
And he had the charm as well. I remember you saying to me that he had all that. He was crass and he was a heavy drinker and whatever, but he had this charm about him as well.
Oh, that was evident when he was on stage. He was very charismatic. He really was a charming person. Off stage, I mean, on stage he was a different persona, but off stage, you know, he was lovely. He was lovely. He came up and grabbed my hand, kissed my hand, how pleased he was to meet me, and all of that. It was just the opposite to what I'd just seen on stage. But none of that was put on. That's the way he was.
And very different to Dave Evans. You know, it was like a glam rock kind of thing. And also, Bomb was a bit of he was in his hippie sort of weird band before AC/DC as well. So he just kind of...
No, Dave was glam. Dave was sort of the glam rock with the tight white pants and the scarf and the bare chest and all of that. It was very different. You would not have thought he just stepped into the band. He just melted into as a unit. It was just so obvious that he was right for the band. It was so obvious. There was no difference between him and Dave was night and day.
As I say, the rest is history, and that band would go on to sell, I think last count, it might be 240 million albums or something.
I think about 240 plus now.
Yeah. Angus is still incredible as the new leader of the band. I mean, Malcolm was the leader. It must have been tough for Angus to step up.
I think it was very tough for Angus because, forgetting the business side of it, he and Malcolm were more like twins, really. They understood each other so well they wouldn't have to even say anything to each other. They knew what each other were thinking. Malcolm, you know, I always felt was the backbone of the band, but, you know, he would stand there and he would admire Angus at how, you know, how much he put into a show. You know, he'd put his heart and soul into every show. I don't think I've ever seen Angus give less than 110% ever. Even when he's been unwell, nothing will stop him, and he gives everything. I mean, if he collapses after the show, so be it. But while he's up there, he's Superman. But they had such a relationship that it would have been huge for Angus, huge to have got up on stage without Malcolm there.
I still live in hope that there might be one last tour. I mean, everyone's hoping that. I mean, once all this blows over and we get back to a little bit of a normal life, we just hope for one more tour.
Yeah, wouldn't that be wonderful? I mean, the album they did, obviously they would have toured at the time, which is the way they've always done things, but
yeah,
because of COVID, obviously that wasn't the case. But the album did so well. You know, they really should be proud of what they achieved with that, and being in lockdown as well. You know, so fingers crossed. God only knows if we ever get back to some sort of normality, then it'd be wonderful to see them back out on the road.
I didn't even know Angus was in.
I don't want to.
Well, that's right. You just want everyone to be safe. But I didn't even know Angus and his wife were in Sydney until I got this text message saying Angus is listening to you right now on Triple M, and I'm like, hang on, what?
He's always been a very private person. In fact, they all have. You know, they all are. When they're off the road, they just retreat to their own homes and live their own lives. But it's nice to know when something like that happens, you know, and you know that he's out there and he's listening. That's wonderful.
Yeah, it was quite a buzz as a AC/DC fan. Lad, very, very, very nervous for the next half an hour. You had a lot of obviously pop artists. I mean, that was the thing about George and Harry as well. They were able to write songs, perfect pop songs, coming from a rock background, which was just amazing. But then you had someone out of the blue who is so different to the rest of them, Angry Anderson. What was it like when he turned up?
Well, I mean, when he walked in, I was just like really gobsmacked because, you know, he was so different. He was so different. He was, you know, not terribly tall. He's got tattoos all over him. He came in a workman's singlet, and he had jeans on, and you know, and he had some sneakers, and he had shaved teeth. His teeth in the front were jagged. His two front teeth were, and he smiled, and I thought it was so menacing. And then he said hello, and he was again one of those things. You know, you don't go by what you see, because the guy behind it was lovely. On stage, a totally different character. He had it was totally different on stage, but as a person, he was lovely. But when they all came in and they're all tattooed, and I thought, I was really taken aback. And I thought, well, I don't know how I'll be able to, you know, I wouldn't think that we've got anything in common, but it was my job, so I, you know, kept it together. But when I started listening to what they'd recorded, it was fantastic, you know, and it was different to what we'd been doing, and they were different, you know. They were much harder act than what we'd had at Albert's before. But Ted's view was he wanted the best of whatever genre it was. He wanted it to be the best, and George and Harry would only have gone with it if they could have got the best out of them, which is what they did. So they fitted in that regard. It was just more of what our aim was and what our vision was as a label.
Is there anyone that slipped through the cracks that you wish you signed?
No, I don't think so. We had quite a few bands that had approached us. Well, when I say us, more George and Harry, because George and Harry had quite a reputation at that stage. And in fact, overseas companies had tried to poach them many times to go and work for them internationally, but they were really happy being, you know, partners with Ted and being able to set things up themselves with their own artists. They actually turned quite a few down, sometimes because timing wasn't right, sometimes because they didn't really fit our work ethic. And George and Harry really demanded, you know, once they put everything into it, they wanted their artists to be the same. But sometimes it was just that they weren't a fit for our label, but were really good artists as well. You know, we started to go more down the rockier road outside of John, JPY, because they'd already established him, and he already had, like, you know, huge international success and could go to anywhere in Europe, you know, perform anywhere. And his records were doing extremely well over there. South Africa, you know, all over the place. So we had the pub rock thing sewn up, really. The one act that I really am disappointed that didn't get off the ground but got very close was Cheetah, the girl band that we had. They were well before their time. They were incredible on stage. You know, they had an incredible presence. And we'd gone overseas. We had quite a success with Spend the Night, which was another Van Young Penn song. And we went over and, you know, they got TV all over Europe. They got TV in the UK. And we were ready to do a tour. Then one of the girls got ill. And unfortunately, we had to cancel just the week before we were going on tour. And so it all had to be cancelled. And that was really disappointing because they worked so hard and we worked so hard. We literally had everything. We had the tour lined up. We had a TV show in every city that we were going into. And the week before, we had to pull the plug on all of it. And unfortunately, you know, when something is that hot and then it fades away for 6 or 8 weeks, especially back then, where you don't have the sort of things that you could keep the presence going like you would today online. When it goes cold, it's really hard to resurface again. So that was a disappointment because they put a lot of effort into it. George and Harry put a lot of effort into it. And we at Albert's put a lot of effort into it. And that should have happened, but that's the one that got away.
I love what you were saying about work ethic too, because I can imagine there's some bands who you knew were going to sell and you knew they were going to be successful.
Yeah, and it's not just, you have to be reliable as well. I mean, if a company's going to put the if a company's going to back you and George and Harry were going to back you, then you had to turn up and you had to be reliable about turning up. You had to be reliable about, you had to be serious about your own career. And if you weren't, they didn't want to waste their time and they didn't want you to waste your time with it. So they were pretty clear in what they wanted in artists, and they were really good. They could go. It must be awful for them, because when I go to see a band, I go, "Isn't that a great band?" or "I don't like it." They'll stand there, and of course, they'll say straight away the bass player doesn't work. You know, they need a new bass player, or the drummer's not fitting in, or something. They could just pinpoint everything all the time.
I want to go back to you now. You were well known as the great networker. You had to be across the newspapers, the radio stations, the DJs, what they were adding, and it wasn't an easy one like it is now, where you can send out press releases and you could just email people. You had to pick up the phone and ring people and all that sort of stuff. You were doing it all day, and then at night time, obviously going to see the bands as well.
I think my strength was definitely networking. I love dealing with people, and I made it a point right from the outset that I would call every time they went, any of our bands went into a town. Didn't matter, it could have been 50 people in the town. I always made sure I contacted the local radio station personally, that I spoke to the jocks that were there, that were in the rock genre and part of it. I would make sure the posters would go out that had been signed by the band. This is back in 1974, 1975, and 1976. I would pick up the jocks back then. I had a relationship probably with almost every rock jock in Australia, right across the board. So when we had a new single come out, I'd have test pressings going out in the post to them so that we'd get them before, just as the record's being released. And in the city area and in the Melbourne area, in most cases, between the record company and between EMI at the time and myself, we would take it out, would make it time to go out and present it and that. But I always followed up on everything myself. I trusted other reps to a degree, but I found the only way that it really worked was that I had to know myself firsthand that something had been done, so that when a band went into town, somebody knew about them, and hopefully that would expand, right through each time they went from one place to another. And I had a lot of pride in that. Fans used to write in. I would write back personally to every fan. I would write to every fan because I know that if you get 2 fans on board and they really love it, they're going to bring 2 more with them, and they're going to bring 2 more with them. And the boys always, whoever it was, all of our bands, when they worked, they created most of the demand themselves by doing the most amazing shows and getting the fans on board. I wanted that to be translated into airplay. And once you could go in and say, "Oh, look, we've just had 500 people, and this happened," you've got a story that will build on it. But it got to the point where most of the jocks would be then calling me and asking me when a tour was on. I'd always try to get someone backstage. I'd try to get people, up to be able to see the band, to get firsthand the whole feeling of an act, so that when they're actually playing and when they're talking about them, it's not from what somebody else said, but because they saw them themselves. So it was that personal connection I thought was the most important one.
I've heard great stories about people going to you. You'd be the go-to person in the office. I know Mark Gable was talking about when they were recording downstairs, they spent at least a couple of days setting the drums up to get the drum sound right, and then they came back after the weekend and the drums had been moved by the cleaner, or it might have been the maintenance guy. And Mark
Probably the maintenance guy.
Yeah, and Mark would say, he'd go running to FIFA saying, they've ruined the drum sound, and you'd go back and say, well, he's got to do his job. And
yeah, and we'll sort it out. And we always did. And, the beauty of an independent like we were is that there's only like 3 people that you go to. It's not as if you can't find someone responsible or someone that can sort things out. It's not as if you can pass the buck on to somebody else. That's it. It was George, Harry, myself and Ted. That was it. So if there was an issue, we would resolve it. And, you didn't have to do, after 6 months, do a work performance thing, because it was such nonsense. I'd say, well, why would you do it in 6 months? If they were doing something wrong, I'd tell them on the spot. I'd resolve what the issue is on the spot. I wouldn't wait 6 months to have a performance review.
Yeah.
And like I said, because we were an independent, and we always work with an independent, you work from beginning to end. I've said this so many times, but it is really one of the main issues, is that when they come in, you know them, you meet them, that you sign them, they go into your own studio, so you go down, you can be with them, see them, hear them, watch them record. They bring back the product. You've got it there. You've got a single. You've got an album. You sit there. You start working through photo shoots, video shoots. You do all of that all in-house. You do your biographies. You do your tour planning with the management and everything, and it's all done. So you don't leave it at any stage and pass it on to somebody else. You're there from the beginning right to the time that that you see them on stage performing it or hearing it on the radio. And when you hear it on the radio, it was just like, oh my God, that was worth it. It was worth it, because the recordings on air today still stand up. After 40 years, they still stand the test of time.
Listening to Evie parts 1, 2, and 3 only today, and it popped in my head because I knew about the history. And was there ever going to be a radio programmer who's going to say to you, "Look, it's too long. We can't do it"?
Well, we thought they would. That's why I think George and Harry, I think they did it in 3 parts so that you could play any one part individually, and it would still sound absolutely fine. But we were blown away when, Triple M just went with it, and all the stations, all the rock stations just went with it. And for the whole 11 plus, I think 11.25 seconds, they played it in its entirety, and it was wonderful.
There are some songs you just have to play properly in its entirety, and that's definitely one of them.
If you go to clubs and they play parts of it, and you see people waiting for that slow bit and then waiting for the big crescendo and the build-up, and it's great. I mean, that was out in 75, and still today, it's so highly thought of, which is wonderful.
Do you still get a rush hearing new music now? Are there certain songs you hear now where you go, you know what, that's amazing? Are you personally keeping an eye on what the trends are now?
No, not keeping an eye on it, but I enjoy anything I do like hearing, or anything that I hear that I like. I always follow up and I call it. It's usually I might know who the manager is or whatever, and I'll ring up and say, I just heard that track. I think it's brilliant. And I still get a buzz out of that. I still get a real buzz out of it. And going to when you go and see a show, I mean, I've got so many favourites at the moment. It's just silly. I mean, I love Amy Sharp. I love Teskey Brothers. I love Josh's voice. There's so much out there at the moment that's really good. It's really good. I'm not involved in it, but I still love to hear it.
Yeah, of course. And you never stop that. And I'll back you up on Teskey Brothers, by the way. Just so talented. Amazing voice.
Oh, the first I heard them years ago, and I thought, oh, I've got to get that. I just heard Teskey, and so I looked it up and I found the albums and I downloaded them all. And basically for about a year, that was the only thing that came on first thing in the morning. And I love his voice. I love all the songs, but there was something about his voice that just was so appealing to me, and I think they're doing brilliantly. And I love Lime Cordial.
Yes.
Cordial. Love those guys. They're really talented. They're just coming into their own now.
They had just a bit of momentum through COVID as well. Like they seem to sort of drop the album at the right time.
They went in between that crack. They got that had a bit of an opportunity there, and they've done extremely well. But I think they've got a big future ahead of them.
Yeah, and I hope someone notices overseas as well, because
I think they are. I think they are being noticed. Yeah. So not actively involved, but definitely love hearing what's out there.
In 2015, you got the APRA Award, the Ted Albert Award for services to music. That must have been just an incredible honour.
It was more than people would ever realise, and it wasn't just because, it was lovely to be acknowledged, by your peers, But the fact that it was the Ted Albert Award, I mean, and Ted meant so much to me in my life because the year that I came back from overseas, my dad got really sick and then he died the following year. And Ted was just incredible. He said he came down to see me, make sure I was okay, and if I wanted to take time off, have a couple of weeks off and that. And I said, no, I actually felt better coming into work really at the time. Had a bit of time off, but he just he put me first all the time when there was a position that was becoming available, he'd say to me, I think you should do that. And I go, oh, no, I don't think I will. I don't think I could. And you go, yes, you can. Give it a try. And I said, but what if it doesn't work out? And then I have to leave and then I'll be really upset. And he said, oh, no. He said, we'll find something else for you. And so I said, okay. So, but then I went into promotions and into A&R, and I worked really well with him because I could just, it was his company, but I looked after it so passionately as mine, and I looked after everything. I was so protective about everything that I couldn't have done more if it was my own company. But I just loved the regard he had for people, and he would talk to, which is something that I noticed right throughout the industry was quite different. He would talk to the cleaner or a receptionist in exactly the same way as he would talk to one of the senior management people. He was a very gracious man. And when I left the first time, I said to him, look, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was really confused. I felt like I'd been in the music industry all my life. There might be something else out there. And his exact words where he said, you've given me the best years and I'd never want you to regret it or regret anything. He said, so, if that's what you need to do, then that's what you need to do. And he said, take 2 months off and see how you feel. So I took 2 months off. This is after I've been there 20 years. I took 2 months off, and at the end of that, I said, I still really don't know. But I walked into the office and I thought, no, I need to have a break. And then he just had a beautiful luncheon for me, and he did so much. I mean, he walked into my office at 11 o'clock in the morning with a box of champagne, and he said, let's have a drink. And I'm going, it's only 11 o'clock. He said, yeah, we can have a drink. And we sat down, and gradually, one by one, everyone came in and started having drinks with us, and then we went out to lunch. But he was so gracious about me leaving and making me feel good. And then when he passed away a couple of years later, he died on my birthday. And I thought, well, there's no way I've got to go back and look after the label. I've got to look after my records, my babies. And before I even had a chance to say anything, they came and they asked me to come back. But I just really admired him as a person, really admired him. And I tried to do a lot of things. I would never be able to do what he did, but I've always tried to treat people in exactly the same way, and I've tried to do the right thing. But someone said, if you wanted to be remembered as being anything, what would you want to be remembered as? And I said, the one thing that struck me was I wanted to be remembered as being fair. And that's how I remembered him. He was always fair. I don't think you can ask for more than that.
And I've only ever heard good things. I know his passion for finding new music, and I think it might have been the documentary where they sort of described how he would often jump in the car and put the record on, or did he have a record player in the car? Is that what it was? I'm trying to remember now.
No. He didn't have a record player, but what he used to do was, I never got this from him. This is what at the time they owned 2UW, or the family did not. It wasn't an Albert's thing. It was the family thing. And when he'd get a recording finished, he would go to the late shift, like the midnight shift or whatever, and ask them to put it on so he could listen to it in his car to see how it sounded in the car, with the bass and everything, and to hear how it came out. And, I didn't see him do that, but it could have been years before I was there that he did that with the Easy Beats, and with Billy Thorpe he might have done that. But I do know that every time I went to listen to something in the studio with George and Harry, they never, when they finished it, they never put it through the big speakers. They always put it through the little oratones. Do you remember the
Yeah,
oratones?
I remember seeing that, and I've been told the same thing.
They would sit there and they'd always say, if it sounds good coming out of those, then we've got it right. And that's what we would do. We'd listen to it through the oratones, and they would sound brilliant, And they always tried, one of their main things that they really strove for was they wanted to capture what the bands were doing live. They wanted you to put on that record and feel like you were at a live concert. They wanted you to have that same experience. They wanted you to have that energy, feel that energy, and the atmosphere in it. They wanted to capture all of that in the recordings, and they were very successful with that.
We were talking earlier before we actually started doing the podcast. We were talking about everyone we'd lost in the last 6 years, 10 years, even 15 years. Doc Neeson came up, of course Malcolm.
We lost Ted Mulry as well, which was that. He was the first artist I ever met at Albers. He walked into my office in 1969. He walked in with a piece of sheet music under his arm. He had carrot hair. He had a sheepskin vest on, and he said he had an appointment with the A&R manager because he had some music, and so he went in and saw Tony Geary at the time, and he brought this song in, and he wanted for someone to record it, and it was Ted that turned around, Albert to Ted Mulry and said, "Why don't you record it?" So they got him in to record it, but he'd only come in as a writer. He hadn't intended to come in as an artist, and he was the first one. So I stayed very close friends with him for a long time. He was just such a sweetheart, and it was devastating when he died. So he was the first one we lost, and then Stevie. We lost Malcolm, we lost George. It's just one by one. It's getting to that age, I think. I just don't want to hear of anyone else going because we've lost so many of our, amazingly talented people. We lost Billy Thorpe, which was heartbreaking. It's just a lot of people. And I go through my photographs and I think, isn't that wonderful? And it breaks my heart when I think that they're not there anymore.
And I even go back to Bon Scott. I mean, that would have been the shock.
That was the first one. That was the worst one because it was the very first one. He was so young, and that was a real shock. It was a real shock. I'd only been speaking to him, days before. So it was really, it felt surreal when they told me that he had died. And I thought, no, and in the back of my mind, even though it's been over 40 years and close in what was 2080, so what, we're 40 years?
Yeah, 42.
41 years. I've always felt that he's out on tour. I've always felt that he's away because it's one of those things when he died overseas, they were actually overseas, working overseas. So I just felt that he's always been on tour. And I like to think of it that way.
I think it's a great way of thinking about it. Being around the studio would have been, really, really haunting.
It was terrible. I didn't, and then what happened was when they recorded the first album, when they recorded Back in Black, when Brian had joined them, George and Harry were in my office, and we got the tapes then from overseas for Back in Black, and I didn't want to put them on. I just didn't want to hear it. I thought it's going to break my heart if I hear someone else's voice on it. And I thought, I don't know that I can. And George put it on. He said, well, let's listen. And You Shook Me was the first track that came on.
Yeah.
And I really fell through the floor. It was fantastic. It was fantastic. I think the energy that Malcolm and Angus, and I think what they put into it, I think they put in their heartfelt loss of Bon in that. They put everything into that album. And I thought it sounded amazing. I was blown away. I was just glad George and Harry were there with me because I don't think I would have put the tape on at all.
Imagine being the AC/DC fan as well, putting on the record, and it would have been Hell's Bells. I guess they would have heard first, and I just love how everyone came back and sort of introduced themselves. The song started. And it was a good minute 15 or something before the vocals kicked in. And it's almost like a reintroduction with the band. And I love that. It's such an incredible thought.
Do you know what the beauty of all of this is? When I listen to all of those records, when I listen to, AC/DC with Bon, when I listen to the Angels with Doc, when I listen to Stevie with Stevie, I don't think of them as being gone. I see them as they were when we did those recordings. I see them back then. I feel energized by them. I don't feel at all saddened that they're not here, because I just feel like I see them in as they were at the time that those recordings were done. It's really beautiful.
In 2016, when Albert's finally got sold to BMG, did that feel like a loss?
I think it's something they felt that they had to do. I mean, they did retain AC/DC and Vanda and Young.
Yeah.
They sold the publishing, which was the most beautiful catalogue. It's a fabulous catalogue, and some of the recordings that they had. And I think they felt it was time to move into a slightly different phase of it was more spreading out a little bit more than just being in the recording industry, as being more in the entertainment industry. And trying to reflect a little bit of where the changes in the industry were going. It was a conscious effort on their part that that's the way they wanted to go. But it felt strange for me, because I'd worked all those recordings right from day one, and I've always felt an attachment to all of them. But I mean, they weren't mine, so they could, choose to do as they did with them. But I think they went to a good home at the time, and I think Albert's, are still, kicking goals and getting involved in quite a few different areas. But they still represent AC/DC and Vanda and Young, which is lovely.
And that's the main one that I think all the fans are concerned about as well, because it's the heart and soul of Albert's is AC/DC and Vanda and Young, and that was really important.
I think so. And I know they feel the same way, even though it's the next generation down, or from Ted. They still have a real, passionate love for them, because they've all grown up with them. It's always been part of the company. It's been part of the company since 1974. We're going into 48 years. It's a long time, and it's been a great relationship. With George and Harry, it's been even longer. Their relationship goes back in 1965, and losing George was heartbreaking. And Harry, God love him, still with us, and he's got his own studio set up with his son now, and he's very happy with where they're sitting with things, but obviously misses his partner too.
Oh, of course he does. In fact, I went into that studio not knowing it was the studio. I got invited in there to check out a band that was being recorded late at night, and I walked in there and they were in the middle of mixing, so it was kind of like the boring part where they've already recorded, and I just went for a little wander and walked around the hallways, and I kept seeing all these gold records, and finally I read Harry Vanda, and I went, oh my God, this is the studio. It was amazing.
That's his studio in Surrey Hill, near Central Station there.
That's it.
Beautiful studios. My working career has been an incredible one, working with some amazing people that I've really enjoyed being with and working with, and we've always had each other's back, and I've never felt threatened within the company like most people, not most people, but a lot of people in the larger companies are always watching their back, and and someone's always guiding them in a way that maybe they don't want to be guided. I just admired Ted for his ability to let people get on with what they do and let them do it well, and being there if they need support. He was always, he had a fantastic ear, so it's not as if he wasn't involved in that regard, but he'd let George and Harry do what they needed to do in the studio. He was very good with the artist as well. I don't think there's any of the artists that you talk to that we signed that didn't think he was wonderful. I think Angry loved him, used to call him Uncle Ted.
And it just sounds like it was a great culture from the top right down to the bottom. And you were saying before about Ted talking to the cleaner and the secretaries and everyone. They're all treated the same.
Well, can I tell you that we had a lady that worked there, Mrs. Gwen Smith. She worked there for 64 years. She left when she was 93.
Wow.
Most of the other ladies that worked there in the earlier years, they'd been there 20, 30 years. I'd been there 40 years at that stage. There's So it just gives you some idea of what the relationship was like. But the CEO before, he'd been there over 25 years. Most companies have their 3-year tenure, and then it's over.
Yeah.
And then move on to something else. There's no moving on. I mean, especially when things were working well and everyone got on so well. So our cleaner, our tea lady had been there for God knows 20-odd years, 25 years. The cleaners have been there, the same cleaners for so many years. Our caretakers were there always like 20, 25 years. So it has to tell you something about the company. And it was more a family. And not that it wasn't professional by any stretch, but it was more a family atmosphere.
Well, it's a credit to you for being a huge part of that. And FIFA, you've given so much to the industry, and you've also given so much for people to look up to, because you're the first woman CEO of a major label, and that's massive here in Australia. And, I think you have literally paved the way for so many great women in the industry now. And
well, that's awfully sweet of you to say, but I got a lot out of it. I got a lot out of the industry. I got a lot out of my company, and I'll always be forever grateful for that.
Well, FIFA Riccobono, it's been so good to have this time with you, and thanks so much for being on The Rider.
Thank you so much.
Actually, I almost forgot, the podcast is called The Rider, and it's all about, what you drink backstage. And I forgot to ask you, what was your drink of choice backstage?
It's so funny because I very rarely had a drink when I was working. Very rarely had a drink. I didn't start drinking until I was in my 30s, I don't think. I hadn't been in a pub. I mean, I'd been to see bands in pubs, which were usually on the side of the pub and everything, but I had not been in a pub as a drinking person until I was about 28, 29. I hadn't been in a pub. Had been to the Lifesaver. I don't really class that as a pub. I lived at the Lifesaver for many years and had the best venue in Sydney. The best venue in Sydney. It was just the most amazing place to be. So that one I did. I used to drink there, but that was always after hours and after bands had been on.
Well, I'm assuming you're a champagne person, so we'll leave it at that.
Thank you for your time, Chris.
FIFA, good on you. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care. Bye.
Well, what an absolute honour that was. I've always wanted to sit down and have a chat with her. That is FIFA Riccobono from Albert's Music. Over 40 years plus 5 of services to the industry. She won the Ted Albert APRA Award for so many years of supporting Australian music, and so many incredible stories as well. So FIFA Riccobono, that is up online right now. You can get it on Apple Music, Spotify, Anchor, or Google, and click subscribe as well. Now, next week on the show, well, where do I begin? An Aussie legendary rock and roll star, still making new music. In fact, he's going to be playing with a band that he's looked up to since his teenage years, and it's an absolute honour to get these stories out of him. Next week, we will speak to this mystery rocker. We'll catch you then. This is The Rider with Becko.